Hi everyone, my name is Wilkins-Laflamme and I am the principal investigator of the International Social Survey Program here in Canada. And so I am on the lovely University of Waterloo campus we just got a snow squall, so lots of snow. And today the whole point of this video is to give you an explainer of how the ISSP is run here in Canada as a kind of support to the details we provide in the methodological and technical documentation that comes with the ISSP data each year. Okay, so let's start with phase one of the beginning, the very beginning of where we start in order to eventually collect the high quality ISSP data each year. And so that is with survey questionnaire development of the ISSP. And if you were wondering why I keep looking down at, I've got my notes here just so I remember to say everything that's important. And so during this first phase, right, the ISSP is an international organization. At the time I'm recording this video, it currently has 44 country members, including Canada. And what that looks like is it's basically a research team in each country helping run the ISSP each year in that country. And what we do is we run high quality annual surveys on topics, on themes, modules in the social sciences, especially political science and sociology, but also economics, environment, and on a whole variety of topics. And we gather data. Each country gathers the data, runs a survey based on the same survey questionnaire, and then we pool all that data together so there's an international data set that any researcher can access. It's open access, and that can answer a whole variety of social scientific research questions from, and you have data on many different countries in each of those data sets. And so how it works is that the ISSP has recurring modules, or in other words, recurring themes. So every 10 years or so, the ISSP will run a certain thematic survey in all of its countries that are involved in the organization. So those modules, I've got the list here, and it is plentiful. So modules on national identity and citizenship, roles of government, leisure time and sport, on the environment, on family and gender roles, on digital societies, on religion, on work orientations, on health and healthcare, on social networks, and on social inequality. And so when it's time to run one of these annual surveys and a module comes back up for rerunning, or the ISSP decides it wants to create a new module, the most recent, for example, is that digital societies module, then it's initially discussed at the ISSP General Assembly. So once a year, all the ISSP country teams get together or send representatives to the General Assembly that's held somewhere in the world. And it's usually a wonderful event, really a kind of gathering of survey methodologist experts, and really a time for us to kind of socialize amongst each other, discuss kind of cutting edge issues with survey methodology, and kind of plan out the next few years of the ISSP. And so at that General Assembly, the ISSP will kind of vote on if they keep running the recurring module that they have in the past, or they'll vote on a new module instead. And then once that vote has happened, the ISSP country members will vote a committee of about 4 to 6 countries who will be in charge of developing that module for that given year. And that vote kind of like a bit like a mix between the UN and Eurovision. It's really hilarious. So, we're all sat around the table, a big table, about, 44 countries worth. Every country representative has like a little flag in front of them on the table. So kind of like the UN, or like my vision of the UN. I've never been. And then we all kind of vote on who we'd like to be on these committees to help develop these modules for that year. And the voting is actually, I always laugh about it because it's actually quite similar to Eurovision, if ever you've watched the Eurovision voting. Every country's got their kind of favorite neighboring countries often that they vote for, and it's all a bit of jostling and kind of who do we vote for. So it's a bit like, maybe not quite as exciting as Eurovision, but there's definitely elements there. So that's kind of the process that takes place. And once the committee is formed, then that committee begins to get feedback from all the different countries on, which survey questions would each country like to see included in that survey module for that year? So compared to like previous years, do you want the same survey questions? Do we keep most of the older ones that have come before so we can compare data over time? Or do we want to cut certain questions that are maybe no longer relevant or we deem aren't being used that much, looking at the dataset metrics from previous modules? Or do we want to introduce new questions, right? Or a bit of everything. And so the committee initially gets that feedback from all the countries, and it's usually done through a few rounds of, in-person feedback and also by email, and a few rounds of voting at the General Assembly to see, okay, what kind of new themes do we want to approach with this module? Maybe what questions should we retire? That sort of thing. So once the committee that's in charge of that module kind of has gotten a lot of feedback, it basically narrows it down to a short list of potentially new questions to add in. And that's where more of the work is, because if we're using a previous survey question that we used before in the same module, there's not a whole lot of work involved, right? We just kind of usually ask that question the same way for this current version of that module. But if it's a new question, then we need to pre-test it and land on an exact wording for that new question. And so that's when a handful of countries, not necessarily the same ones on the committee, but often, or other countries involved, anyone who can basically have the time and resources to do a pre-test of these new questions will. And so they start a pre-testing phase, which is usually done within the span of a few months. And that pre-testing involves cognitive interviews, right? We've got a few short lists of new survey questions, sit down with a few folks, maybe a few dozen folks in different countries, and get their feedback, filling out the survey, and okay, what works, what doesn't work with this question, how do you interpret it, that sort of thing. As well as running a pilot study survey with a few hundred respondents in each country if possible, within a few countries at least, to kind of see, okay, is there high non-response rates for some of these questions? Is there like lag hesitancy time in answering them? Are they answered in a way that's kind of unexpected and might indicate response error? That sort of thing, right? And so there's that pre-testing phase to kind of test out this kind of short list of new survey questions that could potentially make it into the new module. Once the results of that pre-testing are in, they're shared with all the different country members, and some final adjustments are made to maybe the wording of the new survey questions, which ones we think are ideal. And then each question, usually in a following General Assembly, each question, the new ones and the old ones for that module, are voted on by each country member in the General Assembly to say, yes, we want it included, or no, we don't want to include it. The ultimate goal is to land on a finalized version of the questionnaire, which with the ISSP will initially be provided in English and then translated in countries that need the translations afterwards. So it's a very democratic process, so a lot of voting, as I mentioned, which is peculiar and specific to the ISSP in some cases. For example, the World Values Survey is a much more top-down process. This is one of the nice advantages of the ISSP. Each country can get a chance to have input into the process. And each kind of step of developing the survey questionnaire for a given module, for a given year, is voted on across usually the span of a couple of General Assemblies. And so this whole first phase of the process of developing the survey questionnaire with the ISSP across all countries usually takes about 2 to 3 years. It can depend a bit on how things are going, but that's the usual time frame. And so that's usually kind of how far ahead of time the module questionnaires are being thought about and developed before they're actually run in each country. So once that first phase is complete, we're now ready to move on into phase 2, and this is really where the questionnaire comes and arrives into Canada, and we start really working specifically on how we're going to run the ISSP for that year in Canada, right? So once I'm usually the one these days attending the ISSP General Assembly on behalf of Canada. I did the voting on the questionnaires myself. Sometimes a team member is also with me from Canada. And then I go home and wait a few months, and then the final questionnaire, again in English, is emailed to all of us, including myself. And that's when I start working on it specifically in the Canadian context. And so for the English language questionnaire, That's usually a relatively short process. It usually just involves inserting the words Canada and Canadian in a few spots across the survey questions wherever country name or nationality is needed. It also involves adding the 40-odd background variables, also known as socio-demographic variables, that we ask in the same format year to year. So that's on things like age, level of education, income, that sort of thing. So added into that to get the final complete Canadian version of the English questionnaire. Now, the bigger job for me, once the questionnaire is here in Canada, is actually the translation process. Because we don't only offer the ISSP to respondents in English, we also offer it here in Canada in French. And so I have to translate a French version of the questionnaire because the ISSP group only provides the questionnaire in English. And so that'll take a certain amount of time and effort, and it's good to be sure that we do it in a high quality way. And so what that looks like, the translation, is I'll do a first round of translation of the English questionnaire into French. I mean, usually a lot of the survey questions have come from previous modules, so we asked them in French before in Canada, and so I'll just base it off of that previous translation. Also, we'll reach out to other French-speaking countries in the ISSP, like France, like Switzerland, to see how they're translating survey items, especially new survey items that haven't been previously translated for a previous module. But it's important to note that the translations in the same language, so for example, all the French-speaking countries like France, Switzerland, and Canada, they don't necessarily have to have the same French version of the questionnaire because regionally there will be variations in the kind of language and some of the words we use. Certain words that work in France don't work so much in Canada, certain expressions, and so we'll kind of make small adjustments, but as much as possible try and keep it similar to how the French questionnaire looks in other French-speaking countries for the ISSP. So once I've got that kind of first round of translation done, I'll send the French version of the questionnaire to other Canadian team members who are fluent in French to get their feedback on it, see what they think of the way we translated it. And then once that feedback comes back in, make some final decisions about the French questionnaire and finalize it, basically, to be able to run, again, as a choice so that respondents can choose when they're filling out the survey online which language, in English or French, they prefer to fill out the survey questionnaire in. So once that translation process is done, so I've kind of finalized the English questionnaire for Canada, finalized the French one, it's time to go to ethics, right? Because in Canada, whenever you want to run a survey and collect new data from human participants through a university, which is what I do here at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, we have to go through an ethics approval process. So we have an Office of Research Ethics here at the university. I submit them an application, letting them know that I want to run a survey with all the details of that survey, including the survey questionnaires, and they kind of review it, give me some feedback, potentially have some improvements if needed, and then I get their seal of approval to move forward to make sure that I'm running the survey in a respectful and safe way with our research participants. That whole second phase of the process, right? The second phase mainly being kind of translating the survey questionnaire for the Canadian context. That second phase takes, on average, about 3 to 4 months, right? And that includes the ethics process. So once ethics approval is received from the University of Waterloo Office of Research Ethics, then it's time to actually program the survey and run it. So that's phase 3 of actually administering the ISSP survey in Canada, right? So once I get ethics approval, I reach out to the team at the Statistical Consulting and Survey Research Unit here in the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Waterloo. They're the team that I work with that helps me run the ISSP in Canada. And so they will take the survey questionnaires and they will program them using Qualtrics currently as the programming software to be able to run the survey online. They'll also contact the polling firm that we currently deal with. Currently it's Ecos Probit here in Canada. And so that's the firm that we're going to purchase the sample of adult Canadians from across the 10 provinces from. And so, yeah, we reach out to Ecos Probit. Each year we determine what kind of sample size we want. It can vary year to year. It's usually somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 respondents, again, adult Canadian respondents that we're looking for. Sometimes we'll oversample certain groups. So for example, when we ran the National Identity and Citizenship module in 2023, we oversampled a bit for those who were born outside the country, outside of Canada, because that was a kind of relevant group specifically for the themes of the module in 2023. So EcosProbit, again, the polling firm we're currently working with, has a registered online pool of about 90,000 members. I think they keep trying and growing it all the time. And so those 90,000 people, crucially, have been contacted by random digit dialing. So it's not an opt-in online panel, it is a probability-based, randomly sampled online pool of people. And that's actually really important for the ISSP. It's required by the SSP to have a full probability sample. And so we cannot use opt-in online panels. That means people kind of hear about it and register to take surveys online with them. But instead, EcosProbit reaches out by phone to, at random, to try and register people for their online panel. So, out of that larger pool that EcosProbit maintains of online survey members, people who want to take surveys online from time to time, we then sample a smaller amount from them, right? So we'll go and get our 1,500 to 3,000 people from that larger pool. And again, we sample at random from that EcosProbit pool. And so it's usually a stratified sample. So we kind of make sure that we're sending a certain proportion of email invites to different socio-demographic groups, to different age groups, to different gender groups, to different groups with different levels of education, from different regions across Canada as well. And so we send out those a certain proportion of email invites in the hopes that a similar proportion of people will answer and fill out the survey. Crucially, we do not fill quotas. A lot of online surveys fill demographic quotas. So for example, when they reach a certain amount of people from a certain age group, they will stop accepting new responses from that age group. We do not do that. We are not allowed to with the ISSP. So it's only the emails that are stratified, the email invitations that we get EcosProbit to send out in either French or English, depending on the language preference of the online panel member. So once our survey questionnaire is programmed and all the details are worked out with EcosProbit on all the kind of sampling details, then our team here at the SCSRU unit will work with EcosProbit to do a soft launch of the survey. So what that means is for a couple of days, they'll launch it and get about 500 completes or respondents who fill out the survey as a kind of test run to see if there's any last issues we need to address. It's not quite a pilot survey, it's more like a soft launch, right? And if all looks good and all goes well during that soft launch, the unit then launches the survey out completely. And the survey, its full launch is usually open for about a week or two. Sometimes we're lucky and we get the kind of desired sample size within the week. Sometimes it's a couple of weeks, but that phase, that stage of the project is actually pretty quick usually. And again, we kind of keep it open until we achieve a desired number of completes. In other words, a number of respondents that we're wanting to who fill out the survey. Just a moment, I'm crossing the road here. There's a bunch out, if you hear them in the background, there's a bunch of snow plows out because we just had a big dump of snow. So if you're wondering what all the beeping and the machinery noise is, that's mainly what it is. They're clearing out the snow squall. Yeah. And so when we send out we get EcosProbit to send out the email invites to its panel members, the potential respondents will get an email with information about the ISSP survey in Canada, its themes, some examples of its survey questions, the kind of details of the ethics of the project, and so forth. And then they're asked to provide consent to participate by checking a box at the start of the survey. And then they go on to complete the survey online in the official language of their choice, so either in English or in French. The ISSP surveys usually take people about 20 to 25 minutes to complete. That's kind of our average completion time, usually falls somewhere within that. And so this third phase, really administering the survey online in Canada, from kind of getting ethics approval all the way to completing, getting all the completes and the respondents we want have completed the survey, takes also about 3 to 4 months. So once that third phase is complete and the survey is closed and we've got the sample size that we were aiming for, now it's time to move into the fourth and final phase of running the ISSP in Canada, and that is the data cleaning and deposit phase. So once the survey is closed, the Fiscal Consulting and Survey Research Unit will do a first round of data cleaning. So that's kind of, making sure all the respondents completed the survey, and that's, it's real respondents and not bots that answered the survey, and, some cleaning up some of the variables, putting it into the format, a first round that the ISSP wants. And then they'll send me the survey data. Usually it's in kind of a spreadsheet data matrix format. And I will continue the cleaning. So I will kind of, do any kind of variable recoding needed, do any data quality checks needed, before, all kind of preparing the data set to submit to deposit with the ISSP, so the ISSP can take it, finalize it, and add it with the other countries to create the open access international data set. And so this phase that I kind of do involves also writing up the technical documentation of how the survey was run. So that PDF document that maybe some of you have already read for some of the surveys. It also involves creating the weighting variables for the data set. And so if there were certain groups that were underrepresented in our sample compared to the general Canadian adult population, compared to our census data, or some groups that were overrepresented in the data, then we weight them to kind of adjust for that and create the survey weights so that researchers can use them in their stats models if they so choose. So once that data cleaning phase is complete, the data files and the supporting documentation are submitted to the ISSP. They're deposited on the online portal that the ISSP runs for this purpose. Each country has a little spot where they deposit their data and documentation. And then the ISSP team, archival team, does a last round of checks on the data to make sure everything looks good, that there's any last changes that need to be made before they actually create the larger data set. And so once all the countries have submitted their data for that module, for a given survey year, then the ISSP team will merge all of that data together and create the finalized international data set with data from all countries involved on all the variables for that survey module. And they will archive that with the GSIS online data archive, so that any researcher in the world just has to create a free account with GSIS, and then they can download that data for free for research purposes or for other purposes. And all the data is anonymous, obviously, so there's no identifying information of respondents in that data set, and we don't collect it here in Canada or in most countries. So it's always, that survey data is always anonymized. But it is there to be used by social scientists across the world to answer a whole variety of fascinating, great research questions in various social scientific disciplines like sociology, like legal studies, like political science, like those who work on the environment or work in family, and a whole bunch of other topics. And so I've used the ISSP data since I was a grad student, so I don't want to date myself, it was like at least 15 years ago now, and have used it since and love the data. It's very good quality, very rigorous methodological process, and some great in-depth modules that really get into a topic in more detail, and that you can really start answering some fascinating and important research questions. So this whole fourth phase of data cleaning and data deposit usually takes anywhere between 1 to 3 years, right? So some countries get the data in relatively quickly. Some countries it takes a bit longer, and there's kind of a delayed process. This video is being filmed a few years after the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a whole series of delays with the COVID-19 pandemic, because even though we run the survey here online in Canada, many countries still run the survey face-to-face, in person. And so there's a whole delay because of the pandemic for that mode of survey administration. But we're just catching up now. We're just kind of slowly getting back on track. But yeah, that whole fourth phase takes anywhere between 1 to 3 years. So you can see the whole process involved spans a number of years from the very start of working on the module at the General Assembly at the ISSP, and then all the way to the data deposits and the final open access data set that researchers can download in a variety of formats, especially SPSS, but I think there's some other data formats that the data can be downloaded in as well. Yeah, and then, like I said, the data is ready to use and it can be used by students, can be used by emerging scholars and researchers, senior scholars and researchers. We've got, you know, thousands of publications in our ISSP bibliography that we keep track of. They've used the data. We have, you know, many times more. The data has been downloaded from GSIS. You can see all the metrics on the ISSP website if you're curious. And so it's great. It's a wonderful data set and it's there. And I feel it's a great resource for social scientists. And that's why I believe in the data set. And that's why I enjoy being involved and running it here in Canada. And it's worth mentioning, I've talked about the research process and where you can use the data to answer specific research questions, but a lot of people I've met and a lot of people that I know from a variety of countries use the ISSP data also as a teaching tool. For example, I run stats courses at the undergrad level here at the University of Waterloo. I'm planning out my next one for this coming winter term. And we use a practice data set to teach students how to run stats models, how to use software like R and RStudio is what we're going to be using this coming term. And the practice data set I use, of course, is the ISSP because it's got some really great survey questions that really interest students from a whole variety of backgrounds in the social sciences, and data from a whole bunch of different countries, right? Not just in the West, but from around the world. And so it's great to kind of use to engage students, to get them interested in statistics, and to help train the next generation of survey methodologists. So all great uses of the ISSP. So if you have never used it before, please go and check out the data. It's really exciting. And I hope this video gave you a sense of how we collect and clean and finally get the data to you for free download via GSIS. So resources to find out more information. Like I mentioned, there is more details in the technical documentation for each survey, for each country, each year, and each module. And there's also the ISSP website. So www.issp.org has all the information you want about the ISSP itself, its methodology, and so forth. And I've also got a web page, a smaller one here, for the Canadian team, and that is through the Statistical Consulting and Survey Research Unit's website. So if you just put in Google ISSP Canada, SCSRU at the University of Waterloo, you will find our website, and again, more details about specifically the Canadian team and how we run the ISSP here in Canada. All right, you can reach out to me anytime you like. By email is the best way to get a hold of me. So sarah.wilkins-Laflamme at uwaterloo.ca. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have, discuss anything you'd like discussed about the ISSP. And I'd love to hear about your research. If you are using the ISSP, please do reach out to me. I love to hear about colleagues in the country who use the data. All right, it was great chatting with you all. Again, reach out if you have any questions. I hope to meet you at some point and enjoy the ISSP data. Bye.